If you want to understand the sun in the fifth house, it would be pretty handy to first understand the fifth house. So let's just take a minute or two to quickly review what the fifth house is all about. As you can see here, the fifth house is the western edge of the underground quadrant. That's literally physically what the fifth house is. It's that area of sky. And that is what gives the fifth house the symbolism that it has. It's the fact that the underground signifies what's within us, and the west signifies other people. So the western border of the underground sky is all about the inner self moving towards others or interfacing with others. So first of all, that has to do with empathy. And this is why the fifth house is the house of intelligence, the ability to comprehend other people. Secondly, this is also why the fifth house is the house of compassion and sympathy, care, concern. And finally, this is why the fifth house is the house of love or affection. Also, this dynamic of the inner interfacing with the outer has to do with interaction, and that's why the fifth house is the house for communication, and it has everything to do with language, linguistics, symbols, mathematics, all kinds of the functions of the intellect. And this is in turn why this house is very creative and is the house of expression and art. Finally, because it's the house of expression or creativity, it's the house of producing something. And hence it's the house of making children, which is also related with love, right? So it is literal children and also just being the ability to produce results or effects or productivity. Now you're pretty clear about what the fifth house represents. I think we should just take a half a minute also to make sure we're clear about what the sun represents, because we want to discuss what the sun represents when it's in the fifth house. So what's the sun? The sun is the soul. What's the soul? The soul is the thing which is aware, the focal point of consciousness. And this is why the sun is associated with light, because light means awareness. I mean, in fact, it's actually the reason why the sun symbolizes the soul is because it's so bright. And brightness signifies awareness, which means consciousness, which means soul. So because of this, the sun symbolizes vision and visibility, the stuff that light enables. On the topic of visibility, the sun signifies publicity, public life, extroversion, fame, renown, and maleness in general, going out. And on the topic of vision, the sun represents command, leadership, authority, having vision, enforcing vision, seeing to it that a vision is accomplished. Now, the soul is also identity. And because it's the focal point of our awareness, that is the defining point for our identity. So the sun signifies self and everything related to the self, like your self-esteem. Or is it maybe unhealthy or becomes this type of an ego problem? So identity or self is the core of the perceptions. So similarly, the sun represents the coreness of things, the central thing. And that's another reason why it has to do with authorities, but it also introduces the concept of anchor point, stability, regularity, and centrality. Finally, the soul is the actual life force. The conscious awareness is actually the living thing. And so the sun signifies vitality and health. Congratulations. Now all the prerequisites are out of the way. We understand the sun, we understand the fifth house, at least basically. So we are ready to have a discussion about how to interpret the sun in the fifth house. So the sun has to do with vision, and the fifth house has to do with comprehension or intelligence. Those two things get along well with each other. The ability to see and the ability to comprehend are basically the same thing. Hence, the sun in the fifth house indicates an intelligent person. What kind of intelligent person? A person who gets the picture quickly. They see things quickly. A person that doesn't really need other people to show them what's out there. They can see it for themselves. So they're like self-taught or self-learning, self-educating, and they're quick. And they'll have this quality of assessing things, because the nature of the sun is that it wants to assess things so that it can set plans in motion, because it's leadership oriented. So this kind of intelligence with sun in the 5th house is quick assessment of things, quick and accurate. The other thing about the sun, however, is that it is authority and leadership. It's kind of masculine or tough, whereas the 5th house is compassion, sympathy, love. It's kind of feminine or soft. So you have a dichotomy between the strictness of the sun and the compassion of the 5th house, and that's why the sun in the 5th house indicates a person who's a bit rough or tough in their relationships. So the relationships which require more softness to them, like parenting, believe it or not, and definitely like love and romance, the sun in the 5th house isn't very favorable to those. And the reason is it's indicating a person who talks more than listens. There's more of a command than a receptivity, where there's more of a dominance than a reception. And hence those relationships where there's a lot of give and take and it's not all one directional, they're difficult for people with the sun in the 5th house. And so this positive thing about the sun in the 5th house indicating an intelligent person, it has a side effect that affects the communication and the expression, and that the communication and the expression is very clear, and they're very clear cut with how they use words and numbers and symbols and so forth. Whereas that negative thing about the toughness in relationships, it's going to have side effects on the communication as well, and on the children and on the love and affection. Of course, the disclaimer is, I don't know what the rest of the chart is. Maybe the rest of the chart is very soft, in which case this is just a quirk and not a main character trait. But just taking the sun in the 5th house theoretically, this is what it indicates. So that actually brings up the topic of, hey man, we really need to look at this in real charts to see how it really works. So let's do that. So we have 3 test subjects today. We have 3 charts to illustrate the sun in the 5th house. The first belongs to Bill Gates, the second to Paramahansa Yogananda, and the third to Ted Bundy. Very different types of people. Let's see how these theoretical interpretations stand up to their actual charts and figure out why they do or don't stand up well. So the first thing we said about the sun in the 5th house is that the person is intelligent, a quick self-learner. Bill Gates, he's very much an intelligence-oriented person. Why is it so true for Bill Gates? Why does the sun in the 5th house work so well as a descriptor of Bill Gates? Well, one reason is that his sun is his second lord. And so the second house also has to do with knowledge. So the sun in the 5th house, Scorpio, means it's the sun as the second lord in the 5th house. And that is yet another factor which is indicating an intelligent person. A second thing is that his 5th lord is in the 4th house, while his 4th lord Venus is in the 5th. So this is a house exchange between the 4th and 5th houses, which makes it a Raja Yoga. So the 5th house not only has a planet in it which enhances intelligence, it not only has a lord in it which enhances intelligence, it's also in Raja Yoga with the 4th house, which really enhances the intelligence. And this is the basic thing in astrology that you want to do. You want to look for accumulation of the same indication. The more that the same indication accumulates in a chart, the more strongly it is an actual fact in the person's life. As for Paramahansa Yogananda, is this person intelligent? Super intelligent. Very, very intelligent person. Why so? Well, similar to Bill Gates, but in the opposite direction. He has a 5th and 2nd house connection. Bill Gates had 2nd lord in the 5th house. Paramahansa Yogananda has 5th lord in the 2nd house. Exalted. Also similar to Bill Gates, he has a Raja Yoga between the 4th and the 5th lords. So the way that Paramahansa Yogananda gets it is not by house exchange, but by mutual aspect between the 4th lord Jupiter and the 5th lord Saturn. So it's really almost exactly the same thing. He has an accumulation of, not only does he have a planet in the 5th house which enhances his intelligence, the 5th lord is in a place which enhances its intelligence, and is in a Raja Yoga with the 4th house very much enhancing the intelligence. How about Ted Bundy? Is he intelligent? Yeah. His IQ was measured at 136, which is pretty damn high. So look at his chart. His 5th lord Jupiter is in the 4th house, while his 4th lord Mars is in the 5th house. So he too has a 4th and 5th house Raja Yoga by virtue of exchange. So all three of these examples really fit the implication of the sun in the 5th house meaning intelligence, not because the sun in the 5th house really means intelligence, but because the rest of the factors in their chart support intelligence as well. But of course, these people are not really intelligent in the same way, are they? We'll talk about that more when we look at the next quality. But one thing I also want to bring to mind is this very simple technique of counting the number of signs occupied by a person to get a basic overview. For Bill Gates, there's 4 signs occupied. You don't count the nodes. There's 4 signs in total occupied, which means a practical person. So here's a person whose intellect is in a practical context, like business or making money. Paramahansa Yogananda, on the other hand, has 5 occupied. And so here's a person whose intellect is in the context of arts, artistic ideas, motivational stuff. That's the nature of having 5 houses. Also, you can just say, well, Bill Gates has this moon in the 10th house, so he has a career context to his intelligence, and Paramahansa Yogananda has a 12th house moon. Ted Bundy, how many signs does he have occupied? 3, which is a warrior's number. To have 3 signs occupied is warfare, and so hence is intelligent in violence. Now, if we look at the other trait of the sun in the 5th house, which is the strictness versus compassion conflict, indicating toughness in relationships, how does Bill Gates match up against this? Kind of yes, because we recently found out all about that. We recently found out about the extramarital secrecy, kind of very extensive extramarital secrecy. I don't know, I'm not an insider in the Hollywood dirt type of thing, and the recent kind of a high-profile divorce. So what's going on in his chart? One thing to note is that his 5th house is Scorpio. So if the sun in the 5th house has this potential for damaging marital relationships and it's in Scorpio, then it will be through secrecy. The other thing is that his 7th lord, Saturn, is also in Scorpio. And more to the point, the 7th lord in the 5th house, as we just learned literally word for word from Paladipika, makes it very difficult for the marriage. Because the 7th lord is the lord of disappearance. And the 5th house is not directly marriage, but it's children, which is the product of marriage. So things in the 5th house affect marriage. Furthermore, that Saturn in the 5th house, Scorpio, is now conjoined to his Venus. Also, the 2nd house is very important for family relationships, and we see he has a planet in his 2nd house. It's Jupiter, which looks good, but what lord is Jupiter? It's the 6th lord, which is a problematic lord to put in the 2nd house because they're opposites. The 6th house is about enemies, and the 2nd house is about friends, family. And on top of all of this, it is very, very important to note that he has a Kamadruma moon. It is not fully manifest Kamadruma because it's in a Kendra. And it has planets in its Kendras. But he does have a Kamadruma moon, which is going to make him disconnect. So that's why the sun in the 5th house can indicate difficulties in marriage. It doesn't mean just because you have the sun in the 5th house that you will have a difficult marriage. But if you have a chart where there's several other things that also indicate difficulty in marriage, then yes, that aspect of the sun in the 5th house is going to be something that you can rely on. It will happen. But Paramananda Yogananda, how is he in these relationships like parenting? Well, he's a sannyasi, so yeah, that matches him too. He's a renunciate, he's a celibate, he's a monk. what's going on in his chart, it's not in Scorpio 5th house, it's in Capricorn 5th house, which is just cold. It's not secretive and passionate like Scorpio, it's just cold and detached. So he's tough in relationships in a cold and detached way, whereas Bill Gates was tough with relationships in this kind of passionate, secretive way. Moreover, his sun is his 12th lord, so he has this addition of putting the 12th lord in the 5th house, which will additionally indicate distance from or disinterest in children, parenting, and the marriage that produces such things. In addition to that, just like Bill Gates, he also has the 6th lord in the 2nd house. And he also has Jupiter and Mars from Aries, 8th house, aspecting that 6th lord in his 2nd house. The Jupiter and Mars together gives a lot of passion for philosophy. And in the 8th house, it gives a lot of passion for mystical philosophy. And in Aries, it gives a lot of independent passion for mystical philosophy. That is exactly aspecting the 6th lord in the 2nd house. So this extreme passion for mystical philosophy, independent passion for mystical philosophy, will directly impact his desire to participate in family life, which is already impacted just by having Saturn in 2nd house and 6th lord. So there's very little or zero desire or interest in family life. It's not just because of the sun in the 5th house. It's because the sun in the 5th house is phenomenally supported by these other factors that you really get a clear-cut picture of a person that it just doesn't have time for, doesn't have interest in romance, marriage, children. Yogananda, like Bill Gates, also has a Kema Yoga, but his is complete. His is complete. So in other words, his moon is not in a Kendra, nor does it have any actual planet in a Kendra to it. So he has a full manifestation of Kema Yoga, which means complete detachment, complete disinterest. Now, how about Ted Bundy? Is he tough in relationships? I mean, come on, you can't. This is too extreme now. Like, he's violent in relationships. He's a rapist. So why did that become the case? Is it the sun in the 5th house makes you a rapist? No, but if you have a chart like Ted Bundy, then the sun in the 5th house is one of the factors that leads to it. As we already mentioned, he has all the planets are confined to only 3 signs. That helps a person to deal with things in a confrontational or angry way. But there's some other factors that work here. Really, you should just look at the fact that his sun in the 5th house is in an eclipse situation where it's conjoined Ketu in the vicinity of the moon. And not only is it conjoined Ketu, but it's conjoined Mars and Ketu together. Mars and Ketu together is not happy times. Mars and Ketu together is tough times and things which are aggravating, irritating, and violent. Both his sun and his moon exposed to Ketu and Mars, and his ascendant is exposed to Saturn as 6th lord. So this person is not gentle at all. Is extremely irritable, extremely movable to violence. In that context, he's tough in relationships. He's going to be in violent relationships with people, and he's intelligent. So he's a serial killer. He successfully kills almost 24 people. So I hope that clarifies, by example, what the sun in the 5th house really means, and you can see how the theoretical interpretations of being intelligent and being kind of a bit strict and tough in relationships can manifest in your chart depending on what the rest of the chart looks like. If you want to actually have my interpretations for all of your placements in your chart, you can go to my website and order that from the charts page. It's victorcara.com/R2. Thank you so much.